Welcome to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. Now, I'm very excited to be here today because we're having a lot of interesting and important conversation, and I'm very excited to be here to share that information with you, to share my thoughts with you. And I'm also excited because I get to hear your thoughts and your opinions, and I get to share it with everyone who's listening in as well. So make sure you continue to keep those thoughts coming. Make sure you continue to keep those experiences and opinions and questions coming because I would love to hear them. I would love to hear whatever it is that you have to say. So make sure you do that because we're going to be having a very important conversation right here on the sunrise right now. Okay. Now I'll be keeping you company all the way until 9 a.m. But actually, before we head into our conversation, I want to very quickly remind you that you can be a part of this show. All you need to do is just text me on 078-52473-473 to be a part of this show, to share your thoughts, to share your opinions with me. Call me, text me, comment on our live streams. Please do let me know what you think and let me know what you feel as well. Okay. And it's also very important for you to go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Don't forget to actually like us on Facebook and follow us on the rest of the social media apps because that way you can find the best of content, you can find the most interesting content, and you can always make sure you're informed and you're aware about everything that happens all over the world. And don't forget to download our app as well, which means you can tune into our discussion, to our conversation at any time of the day from anywhere in the world. So don't forget to do that because we have a lot of interesting conversation. We have a lot of important conversation. It's all about making people aware. It's all about breaking those barriers that exist in terms of, things we can talk about. And it's also about making sure everyone understands and everyone gets to share their opinion with me and with everyone else who's tuning in as well. Okay. So make sure you do that. Don't forget to do that because I would absolutely love to hear what you have to say. Now, today we're actually, or rather, right now, we're actually going to be talking about how Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue has in fact unveiled its first ever transgender cover star, okay, which happens to be Leyna Bloom, right? And in terms of the transgender movement, in terms of how far the transgender movement has come, this is in fact a huge move for them, right? This is in fact a huge win for the trans community, especially these past few years because there has been a lot of representation, there has been a lot of inclusivity for the trans community, right? So obviously that's important, and the reason we're talking about this is because we know how they have been oppressed, we know how they've had to go through a lot of oppression and discrimination, especially back in the past. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, sure, it still exists, but I have to say, in terms of how they were treated back then and how they're treated now, I mean, sure, some of the discrimination still exists, but in terms of acceptance, people nowadays are in fact more willing and more accepting of of that community, of the LGBTQ community, and especially the trans community. Okay, so that's why we're having this conversation, because it will help all of us understand, it will help us understand their perspective. And we'll also take a look into the trans modeling history to sort of understand where they came from and what exactly happened, and how this whole movement, how this whole community is in fact better represented and they have more inclusivity right now. Okay, so we'll talk about all of that, but do make sure you stay tuned because this is an important conversation. You can educate yourself, you can make yourself aware of these things if you don't know, and this is a place where we discuss all of these things so we understand and we accept people for who they are. Okay, so stay tuned, make sure you stay tuned because we're having this conversation. Now, the modeling industry right now looks a lot different than it looked, 60 years ago, especially for the trans community, because when transgender model April Ashley was stepping into the scene of the modeling industry, it was in fact very different. And from the 1960s until recently, trans models actually walked the runways with varying degrees of success. And many of them were in fact forced to conceal their identities to actually book gigs. Okay, and one of the best, for in my opinion, if you are in interested in the trans community, if you're interested in learning about the struggle, in how they actually had a very hard time back then, and if you want to know about the struggles they face, a very good TV show that you can watch is actually Post, right? Because they, and the best part about it is, it's casted from people from the queer community, right? So they're all, they all belong to different parts of the queer community, and it's absolutely amazing because it actually makes you aware, and it helps you understand the kind of struggles and the kind of lives they have and the lives they had as well, including all of the discrimination, the marginalization, and the racism that they faced as well, because most of them were people of color, right? So back even in the 1960s, a lot of these, trans models had to conceal their identities to actually be in that industry, because at that point of time, being trans, being homosexual, being anything else that was not, being anything other than heterosexual was something that was looked down upon. It was frowned upon, and it was thought of as a sin, and there was a lot of discrimination and marginalization that people from that community, especially the LGBTQ community, had to face because of the way that they were looked down upon, and because of all these heterosexual norms that were there to discriminate all other people. Right. So, like I said, until the 1960s, things, or rather from the 1960s until recently, things were actually quite hard for the trans community, right? And oftentimes the only times a trans model made headlines was only if they were outed, right? If someone, figured out that they were trans and then they published it on the newspaper, then that was the only time that they realized, this person is actually a trans model. And more often than not, when that happened, a lot of them lost their jobs, a lot of them had to, conceal themselves, a lot of them had to, go away from the public view, because they were then considered as some sort of circus act, right? They were seen as some sort of freaks of nature, and that was, the common consensus of a lot of people as well. And so, they would always look at trans people in such a way that they felt so, they always felt like they were some kind of freak. Like, that's how people looked at them, and that's how they felt, because of these mindsets and because of these narratives that existed regarding transgender, models and whatnot. Okay, so today the runways actually are much more diverse, and they represent identities across the gender spectrum, right? And that's obviously thanks to the efforts of the trailblazing predecessors of, of that community. It's because of it's because of their ancestors, it's because of those people who actually, kept fighting for their rights, that they can actually come up now and, model, and that they're included in all these modeling campaigns and fashion campaigns, and even in the fashion industry, right? Because something we've constantly heard is that the fashion industry is in fact very exploitative, right? There's a lot of exploitation that happens, there's a lot of harassment that happens, and even now the fashion industry is like that, right? Because how many stories have we heard of models that got harassed? How many stories have we heard of models who were dealing with eating disorders, body disorders, because of the pressures that were placed on them from the modeling industry, right? Now, the first mainstream transgender model was actually Tracy Africa Norman, who was handpicked in 1971 by Irving Penn at a casting call for the Italian Vogue, right? And from there, Norman actually walked for houses like Balenciaga, and even signed contracts with brands like Clairol and Avon, right? So this was huge for someone from the trans community, even though at that point people didn't actually know she was trans. It was huge for their community, because look, they were finally getting the representation they needed. They were finally getting that inclusivity that they needed, something that they had wanted, because they were marginalized and discriminated a lot back then. So this was very important, right? And her future in fashion actually seemed boundless. But when she was actually outed as a transgender woman, the work disappeared. No one wanted to hire her as a model, no one wanted to have her in their fashion campaigns, no one wanted her in her brands, because, she was outed as a transgender model, right? And despite the prejudice shown against Norman at the height of her career, the fashion world has in fact long maintained close ties with the LGBTQ plus community, right? And that's the most ironic thing, because a lot of these designers, their muses, a lot of designers out there as well, have belonged to the have either belonged to the LGBTQ community, or they've been allies of the LGBTQ community, right? And even in instances like that, even though there is this close alliance between them, a lot of trans models were in fact outed. They lost work, they were disrespected, they were harassed simply because they were transgender, right? Now, some of the industry's biggest leaders have actually had transgender muses. So, for example, Stephen Sprouse actually worked very closely with Terry Toy in the 80s, and Thierry Mugler was actually with Connie Fleming in the 90s, and Jean Paul Gaultier was with Roberta Close also in the 90s. Okay, so they did in fact maintain very very close friendships. They did in fact maintain very very important. Alliances, and they also had a lot of transgender muses. Now, today, trans models actually grace the runways without anyone even blinking an eye, right? And the truth of that is that right now people are definitely much more accepting than before. And I'm not saying that that whole discrimination, that marginalization has completely been eliminated. No, it's still there in some way or form, because those things are in fact institutionalized, right? Now, for example, if you take a lot of Asian countries, they in fact have these heterosexual laws that specifically prevent heterosexual people. So, for example, if you're caught, or if you are known as someone who is either homosexual or you belong to the LGBTQ community, you can in fact be punished for it. So for a lot of people in Asia, being trans, belonging to the LGBTQ community is in fact something very very hard. However, right now, in terms of trans models, especially in the West, there is in fact more acceptance. People are more accepting of who they are as individuals, right? Now, Hunter Schafer, who was actually originally a runway model, now in fact boasts a starring role on the hit HBO show that is Euphoria. Okay, and last summer, Valentina Sampaio actually became the first transgender model to grace the cover of Sports Illustrated, and Andrea Paik, who actually walked catwalks in Paris as early as 2011, helped pave the way for them both, right? And ahead, some of the trans models actually poised to become household names if they're not already. So some of these, names like Valentina Sampaio, Hunter Schafer, Leyna Bloom, they're in fact household names right now because of their careers. Now make sure you stay tuned, because we will be discussing more about this, especially with Leyna Bloom being on the sports magazine as the swimsuit model on the cover. So we will be talking about all of that, but make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're actually going to head into a small break.
and it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh. So that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Girls, ladies will ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, got me thinking. You want to stand out. Why do you want to stand out though so much, especially with these kind of shirts when you're riding? There must be a purpose behind it, right?
Well, when you say a purpose, Nick, what I do, I wear the shirts, and mainly one because they're nice and bright, so they make me visible, especially if I'm riding on the road.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's very important, right? Because you want cars, yeah.
Very important. And also, like, people see me in, like, calves, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying this on here, I suppose, but in the bar afterwards.
All right.
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh, so that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Girls, ladies will ask, "Hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful?" I mean, hey, you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, you look like a guy who would do.
You know me too well. You know me too well, Nick.
Welcome back to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. I'm very, very excited to be here because we're having a very important and informative conversation about, about transgender modeling history and what exactly it means for this community, especially when Leyna Bloom was, recently on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. Okay, so that is something that we're talking about because in terms of representation, in terms of inclusivity, this is something that is absolutely amazing for a group of people that have been marginalized for a very, very long time. And since recent, there has been a lot of transgender models, especially in a lot of fashion campaigns and a lot of modeling campaigns, which means that it has actually opened up a lot of paths for them in terms of representation. So that is what we're talking about because that's what we do here that's what we do here on Relax Radio. Okay, we talk about these things, we make people aware about these things, we make sure you're informed and educated about everything that happens here, not just here in the United Kingdom, but in fact all around the world as well. So it's important for us to be having this conversation, and if you have any thoughts, if you have any opinions that you want to share with me, make sure you get in touch with me and text me on 078-52-473-473 to share your thoughts, to share your opinions with me as well. Now, don't forget to do that because I would love to hear what you have to say. I would love to hear what your thoughts are, what your opinions are, and how we can actually make the community much more accepting of them and, make sure that they have the same amount of rights as heterosexual people do, right? So that's what we're talking about. So make sure to share your thoughts with me, okay? And also don't forget to go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. You can in fact go follow them. You can look at some of our amazing content, and you can actually make sure that that you follow that content and that you're always informed and updated about everything that happens, not just here in the United Kingdom, but in fact all around the world as well. And don't forget to download an app which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. That way you can join this conversation from anywhere in the world. And I honestly don't think it gets much better than that because Relax Radio is the only radio that you can do that at. Make sure you tune in, make sure you share your thoughts, and you make sure you're listening from anywhere in the world it is that you're in. Okay, so let's get back into our conversation because earlier we were just talking about how a lot of trans models actually lost their jobs if they got outed, if someone realized that they were trans and then they published it on the newspaper. So those were in fact huge issues. So that's what we were talking about. Now let's talk about right now, because increasingly trans has in fact come to signify a certain wokeness or hipness, right? And that's not always bad. Look, I understand that in their perspective, it sucks that the only reason you'll associate with trans people, or the only reason you have trans people on your campaigns is to make sure you look woke or you look hip or you're liberal and accepting of these communities, right? But the truth is, it in fact, has included a lot of representation and inclusivity for these transgender models, right? Now, to show somebody trans in a positive light as something that is desirable or normal or acceptable, that is like marketing. That is like a marketing use of subcultural chic, right? Which is basically to sell shampoo or soap or tequila or what have you, right? Whatever it is that you want to sell, if you basically include a transgender model, you're in fact making sure that they have a lot of representation, that you're making sure that you have that you have inclusivity for them. But also, you're making sure that people know that you're a brand that accepts people, regardless of what their sexual orientation is, that you still accept people for who they are, right? Because back in the UK, a closeted transgender woman called Caroline Cossie actually had been climbing the ladder of the fashion industry under the name Tula. Okay, and the reason we have to talk about her as well is because even here in the United Kingdom, no matter how much we talk about being liberal and whatnot, there is in fact still, some amount of discrimination, some amount of marginalization, especially when it comes to the trans community. So Caroline Cossie had actually, who's actually known as Tula, was actually a closeted transgender woman, right? And Cossie worked as a model from 1975 to 1981, and she appeared in magazines such as the Australian Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. And she also did extensive work as a model. Right. And another thing was that she also appeared in the 1981 James Bond film, for a film which was called For Your Eyes Only, and even in Playboy alongside the film's other Bond girls, right? And the film actually led her to being outed by the news of the world in an article with the headlines, James Bond's girl was a boy, right? And that itself just goes to show how discriminatory and how terrible the media treated people who are transgender, right? Because look, even the headline itself just goes to show how terrible you can be, because the headline literally says James Bond's girl was a boy. And that is in fact very disrespectful for someone who is trans, because they've made the transition because they don't feel comfortable in who they used to be, right? And that's why they've made the transition. So just going ahead and publishing something like that, and making them feel so uncomfortable, making them feel like there's some sort of freak show, or like making them feel like there's some sort of circus act, is in fact the most terrible thing that you could do to someone, especially if they were trans. And especially since the trans community is a community that is struggling so much, is a community that has that has had a lot of issues in terms of acceptance. It definitely must have made her feel so uncomfortable, must have made her feel so terrible about about herself, right? And that's just one example. And the truth is, a lot of there have been so many trans models out there who have been outed like that. So many models out there who have actually who've had to go through this sort of abuse, this sort of discrimination, especially from the media, right? And something that the media really does in terms of trans in terms of the trans community, or did in fact in terms of the trans community, was it's very easy for media to manipulate people, right? So when you publish headlines like that, when you publish articles like that, obviously that's going to sow a lot of that's going to sow a lot of hate, that's going to sow a lot of dislike towards people from this community. Okay, so that's definitely terrible way to go about it. And I don't understand why in the first place they had to out people like that, like in terms of, because that is in fact harassment, right? At the end of the day, your sexual orientation shouldn't be of anyone's concern. It should only be your concern, and that should be it. It really shouldn't be anyone else's. So that's what that's what we're talking about. So, in terms of what actually has changed right now, how has this developed right now? What are the changes that are there right now? Let's talk about all of that. But before I head into what it actually has changed right now, I want to let you know what you think about this, right? Let me know your thoughts, your opinions. Just text me on 07852473473, or even call me up on that same number, because that way you can actually make sure that make sure that you share your thoughts, your opinions with me. Let me know how you feel, let me know how we can actually make this place a better place for all people, regardless of their gender, regardless of their sexual orientation. We must make sure that the world is a place that is that is accepting, and it also is a world that has a place for everyone, right? So what actually has changed in recent years? Now, something that a lot of professors who specialize in trans studies actually say is that there is something that is referred to as a trans tipping point within popular culture, right? Now, I will be getting into all of that. I will be explaining all of that for you to exactly understand what exactly this trans tipping point is, right? And this actually dates to 2015, when when the former Olympic decathlete, that was Bruce Jenner, came out as Caitlyn Jenner, and now obviously she's Caitlyn Jenner, right? So what happened was, when a lot of celebrities, when a lot of famous people started coming out as trans, there was in fact more acceptance, because these people were saying, look, you know what, this kind of lifestyle, this is who we are. You need to accept us, and we can't keep hiding ourselves, and we can't keep being closeted simply because you're uncomfortable with the way I am. And that uncomfortability is something that you need to work on. That internalized homophobia, transphobia is something that you need to work on, right? It's essentially saying, look, I don't care what you think, because I'm going to come out as who I truly am. And in this day and age, it's important for all of us to have our identity, right? We should be able to be in touch with our identity. We should be able to know who we are, right? So obviously, in instances like that, we definitely need to make sure that people are going to be accepting of us. And you know what, even if they don't, well, I'm just going to come out and be okay with who I am. Right now, what's important is, as human beings, all of us struggle with identity, right? So you can understand that obviously, if you are if you're trans, or if you belong to that community, it's in fact it would have been very, very hard for you to for you to live in that identity, because there's so much of hate, there's so much of discrimination and marginalization for people in that community, right? Now, targeting of trans people by the right wing has also brought the issue of transness into the public image, right? Because a lot of people have started noticing how much right wing politicians actually, target trans people, regardless of whether they're trans women or trans men. There is a lot of there's a lot of targeting of trans people by the right wing, and that in itself has made it clear to the public how there is so much hate towards them, right? Because hiring somebody who is out as trans actually becomes a sort of political comment, or even some kind of flag that you're a certain kind of progressive, and that you have a certain woke mentality, right? And that's what hiring trans people has actually become. And sometimes you don't some of these campaigns don't just hire trans people just so they can look woke. Some of these campaigns actually hire trans people because they want to make sure that there's representation and that there is inclusivity, right? So you're basically using disability or fatness or transness or even racial diversity as a way of saying, our product fits in with your progressive, woke, metropolitan, hip, progressive views, right? And that's just, and that's basically what they're trying to do as well. Now, Jay Macaulay Boasted, who's actually a lecturer at the London College of Fashion, believes that social media has also provided a space through which more diverse representation can in fact emerge, right? And obviously, I agree to that as well, right? Social media has in fact created a space where where people are more open, where people are more acceptive about about the diversity that exists within society, right? So for example, social media is a place that has a lot of negativity but a lot of positivity as well, because there are so many kind, generous people out there who are in fact very acceptive and supportive of the LGBTQ community, right? Now, brands and magazines can now look old fashioned if they do not mirror the diversity that is seen on social media. And the truth of the matter is, no one will want to buy your brand, no one will want to invest in your brand if you're not going to reflect the kind of, political wokeness and liberal wokeness that a lot of us have right now, right? Because a lot of young people right now are in fact what you would refer to as woke, right? They're more acceptive, they're more liberal, and they want reforms, and they want to make sure that this world is much, much more equal for everyone than it used to be. And Honestly, I think that's a part of why maybe brands and fashion weeks and catwalks and magazines are also changing the way that they represent people. Because positive representation of trans people can be a good thing. But the truth is, it's not as equal as changing laws or keeping people from being killed by transphobes. But while it's a good thing, it's still a small part of the big picture. To actually make sure they're safe, to actually make sure that they're protected, to make sure they have equal rights, to make sure they have equal opportunities, we need to change those laws. We need to make sure that people are going to be persecuted if they kill trans people. If you're transphobic, then there has to be some kind of law that actually makes sure that you don't treat them differently just because of who they are. So even though change is being made, it's still a small amount of change compared to the big picture that really needs to change. So make sure you stay tuned because we're having an interesting conversation, and we will be getting into it more. But until then, we're going to head into a small break. But right now, make sure you stay tuned. Welcome back to the conversation. I'm very, very excited to be here because we're having a very important and interesting conversation about the history of transgender modeling, right? And obviously, we're having this conversation because Leyna Bloom was she was just on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. And earlier, last summer, it was Valentina Sampaio. And obviously, that's why we're having this conversation because throughout these, past few years, we've seen how there has been a lot of representation and diversity and even inclusivity in terms of the trans community. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Now, make sure you stay tuned because we're having a very interesting conversation. We're sharing a lot of thoughts. I'm sharing my opinions and my thoughts on this and why we actually need to make this world a safer space for everyone, and make sure that everyone is more accepting of each other, right? So that's why we're having this conversation now. While we're at it, don't actually forget to text me, which you can do on 078 You can text me, you can call me, whatever it is, you can do that because I would love to hear, your thoughts, your opinions on this and why, you think that that we need to change the way we, look at these people, the way all the laws that are in place, to make sure that these people feel more accepted, that they feel more, that they feel like they're a part of the system too. So if you have any thoughts like that, make sure to share it with me. And also, don't forget to go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Okay. So make sure to go follow them, because we have a lot of fun and interesting content. We love to make sure that you're educated. We love to make sure that you're informed and you're aware about everything that happens all around the world. So don't forget to do that. And don't forget to download that app either, which you can actually find on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. You can find the app, and you can download the app, and you can listen into the conversation, all the time, anywhere in the world. You can always listen to the conversation, so don't forget to do that. But right now, let's actually head back into the conversation. Now, we were just talking about how, right now, if you include a lot of trans people in, or the fact that the representation of trans people in modeling, in fashion campaigns, actually just goes to show that you are in fact a brand that is, that is woke, that is liberal, that is accepting of all these different types of people and different, different communities of people, right? Something that has been a huge issue, especially in the fashion industry, because there have been so many times that trans models have faced a lot of harassment and abuse in the fashion industry, right? So obviously that's what we're talking about. And if you have any thoughts that you want to contribute, make sure you do that. But to get back into our conversation, even though all of these changes are being made, even though there's a lot of representation and inclusivity, it doesn't really mean anything has changed if we still don't change the laws, or that, keep people from being killed by transphobes. Okay, we need to change those laws. We need to make sure that those laws, in fact, those laws in fact penalize people if they do something to the trans community, to the LGBTQ community, and make sure that people don't get to act out on the homophobia or the internalized transphobia, right? So that's an important conversation to be having as well. Now, Sports Illustrated's swimsuit issue has in fact unveiled its first ever transgender cover star, that is Leyna Bloom. Right now, the model follows in the footsteps of Valentina Sampaio, who was the first trans model to appear in the pages of the magazine last July. Okay, so she just appeared in the pages of the magazine, whereas Leyna Bloom appeared on the cover of the magazine. Right, Bloom, who is actually black and Filipino, is also the first ever trans woman of color to be featured in the magazine. So, writing on Instagram, Bloom actually said that this appearance heals a lot of pain. And I understand why she said that, right? Especially if you're from that, if you're from the trans community, especially, if you've heard so many stories of the people before you, if you've heard so many stories about trans people before you who got outed as trans, and then they lost their jobs, no one gave them work, and they completely cut themselves off from that public scene, from the public view, because of the harassment and the abuse they were facing. It actually, heals a lot of pain, right? I mean, obviously not completely, but it is in fact a process. At least it's a starting point of a process, right? It's basically this process of come to terms and healing, and much more acceptance than they had back in the past, right? So she also wrote, we deserve this moment. We have waited millions of years to show up as survivors and be seen as full humans filled with wonder. And that is a very heartfelt quote. When you read it, if you follow her on Instagram, or if you haven't even seen her post, go check, Leyna Bloom on Instagram, and you'll see her post. You can actually feel her emotions when you read it, because you understand that she comes from a place, she comes from a community that has been through a lot of pain, that has gone through a lot of suffering, that has had to sacrifice so much to be where they are right now. So the fact that they're getting these opportunities right now, the fact that they're talking about these opportunities and they're including more trans people, it means that there's more representation for them. It means that there's more inclusivity for them. It means that these people are finally getting that sort of appreciation. They're getting the spotlight that they deserve, right? And it's absolutely amazing, because they have gone through so much of suffering. They've had to sacrifice so much, and finally, they're getting that place in the world, which is something to be, grateful for. Especially, not necessarily grateful, but something to be happy about, something to be hopeful about. That's the word. So yeah, in terms of what she wrote, and you can actually feel her emotions when you're reading what she wrote, because she said, we deserve to be at this moment, because we ourselves are also human beings. We're filled with wonder ourselves, so why do you treat us treat us differently, right? So Bloom is actually a part of New York's ballroom scene as well, and she wrote, this historical moment is important to hashtag girls like us because it allows us to be to live and to be seen, right? Which is something that they didn't have back then, right? Because they it wasn't actually, it was very hard for them to live and to be seen, because we've heard so many stories about trans people getting killed, trans people being murdered. And what's distressing and what's upsetting is that trans people don't actually live past the age of 35, and if they do, that's just a rare amount of them, because most of them are murdered by the time they're 30, or before they turn 35. So that's actually heartbreaking, the fact that not a lot of people survive past their 30s because of the fact that they're murdered. And if anything, that just goes to show how much we need to reform our laws, how much we need to change our laws to make sure that all these people are in fact a part of our community, that they're included and that their rights are protected, and that they're given the equal rights and opportunities as heterosexual people as well. Okay. Because she also added, in that whole post, she said that many girls like us don't have the chance to live our dreams or to live long at all. And that's just her saying, look, we get killed, so we don't get to live our dreams at all. And I hope my cover empowers those who are struggling to be seen and to feel valued. Okay. Which is something that, as human beings, we want to be seen, we want to be valued, we want to make our mark on the world, and we want people to understand or realize, or even, tell us that, you have an impact on this world, you change this world, you're important to this world. But especially if you come from a community where, you're discriminated, you're marginalized, and you're not necessarily seen because people don't want to see you because of, who you are, and people treat you differently because of that. This is obviously historical for her, and the fact that she wrote it allows her to be seen, it allows her to feel valued, just goes to show how much we need to change in terms of acceptance, in terms of making sure these people also feel the exact same way that we do, make sure that they are allowed to have equal rights and equal opportunities as well. Now, Mia Abrams was actually co-founder of Your Body, which is a non-binary underwear company. Said that they hope it will open doors for members of the trans community, right? And she also said, "I hope this sort of moment prompts other mainstream fashion brands to actually start paying attention to their responsibility in trans liberation and gender freedom." Okay, which is something that is important as well. Trans liberation, gender freedom, making sure people have, trans people, other genders, and people from other genders have equal opportunities, have equal, opportunities, is something that is very important. And that's what this whole fight for liberation has been about as well. This fight for liberation, this fight for equality has been about making sure that they get the same, that they, deserve that same amount of justice, they deserve that same amount of liberation that other people have as well. And it's absolutely heartbreaking because, if you read up on these stories, if you watch documentaries, you will understand and you will realize that for a lot of trans people, if they were harmed, if something happened to them, there was nobody that actually cared about them. They could never get justice because they were always a community that was looked down upon. They were always a community that people thought were, unworthy of justice. They didn't deserve justice. They didn't deserve equal opportunities. They just thought that they didn't deserve opportunities at all. Right. And so when you come from a place like that, this sort of thing, it's monumental, right? Because it means that you're paving a way for your brothers and your sisters, you're paving a way for other trans people to actually, claim their dreams, to tell themselves, look, this is achievable, this is not impossible anymore. I can actually be on the cover of a magazine, I will have more acceptance, I will have more, opportunities. However, having said that, it also means that we need to deal with trans hate. We need to start tackling and talking about this issue of trans hate, and how trans people actually go through a lot of discrimination. Because even though we talk about representation, even though we talk about, making sure that they have enough representation and that they are included in everything, we don't really talk about how we plan to combat, trans hate, how we plan to combat all of the other terrible things that trans people have to face. So obviously that's an important conversation that we need to have, along with the fact that, trans people are getting represented, right? So that's important to do as well. Now, she said, my long term goal is for gender inclusivity to exist top to bottom and left to right in organizations. But I think at first we'll see many first steps and one off attempts that feel more surface level. And I think, this should be everyone's goal, to make sure that there is gender inclusivity in all organizations, in all institutions, in all political structures, just to make sure that people have the exact same opportunities that other people have as well, and that they shouldn't be left out and treated any differently because of who they are, or because of their sexual orientation, which is in fact a very, very terrible thing to do. Now, Abrams said that the cover is so much more than a visual statement, and that's actually quite true, because it's not just the first ever transgender cover model, right? It also means that this is in fact creating a lot of opportunities for other trans people out there. It also means that, look, that whole struggle of trans liberation has gotten somewhere, because trans people are getting much more representation. They're getting much more, inclusivity and whatnot. And that's important as well. The cover, in fact, represents an important statement of trans inclusion at a moment where legislation and even political movements are seeking to exclude transgender girls and women from cultural spaces that celebrate womanhood. Okay, and that's what they had to say. So that's important to keep in mind, but make sure you stay tuned, because we still have a little bit left to keep talking to you. So until then, make sure you stay tuned, because right now we're actually going to head into a small break.
The valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday, and what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you got to start with saying, well, what do I want my net worth to be? So that there's a goal. And then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations. And it's what we use in financial planning all the time. What we say to clients is we say, okay, what is your goal? What is your objective? Where do you want to go to? And we discuss that in a lot of detail and over most of the meeting. And then the rest of it is saying, okay, in your exact circumstances, with your risk profile, with how you feel about investments and pensions and taxes and where you are and who you work with, and your education level or your lack of education or how involved you want to be. There's a lot of variables that we take into account, and then we say, okay, here's a plan. You start like this, that's great. And then we review it all the time. And we say, okay, we need to increase it, we're on track, we're not, this is what is happening. Because remember, when you're dealing with assets, the valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday, and what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's a struggle. Yeah. So there are strategies everywhere from £50 a week up to £100 million, and they're different, right? They range differently from everyone, but and from country to country, to be fair. Different countries have different tax laws to different vehicles. But from your point of view, at the sort of normal end, I'm not going to call it the low end because I'm in that boat as well. It's as tax efficient as you can get it. That's where you start. You use all the tax efficiencies, and then you step up into different things.
Welcome back to the show. It's your girl Sarah right here on Relaxed Radio. Now you're tuned into the sunrise, and it's in fact the final few minutes of the show. But don't worry, because I will be here for because I will be here for another hour actually, and I will be here to make sure you're entertained, to make sure you're informed about everything that happens all around the world. So make sure you stay tuned because we're going to be getting back into our conversation right now. But before we do that, I want to very quickly remind you that you can in fact be a part of the show. All you need to do is just text me on 07852473473 to get in touch with me. You can text me, you can call me, and you can share your thoughts and your opinions with me because it's all about conversation. We care about you. We want to know what you think. We want to know what you are thinking. So make sure you do that. And don't forget to follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Okay. Don't forget to go like us on Facebook and follow us on the rest of those other social media apps. You know, there's so many, but make sure you follow them because that way you can stay tuned. You can stay informed and educated about everything that happens, not just here in the UK, but all around the world as well. So make sure you do that because it's definitely going to help you. It's definitely going to help you be updated and make you aware of everything that happens around the world. Now, also don't forget to download the app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. That way, you can actually make sure that you can join into the conversation at any time of the day from anywhere in the world. So make sure you do that. Now let's actually get back into our conversation about trans modeling and what exactly it means for the trans community with Leyna Bloom being on the swimsuit issue. Right now, Bloom actually joins the rapper Megan Thee Stallion and even tennis player Naomi Osaka, who feature on three different covers of the swimsuit issue, which is themed "Opening Eyes, Speaking Truths, and Changing Minds." Right, and I think that theme in itself is in fact very, very it's significant. It has a lot of meaning because it's all about making or rather opening the eyes of the world and speaking their own truth and changing people's minds with speaking the truth. So I think that's a very important theme as well because we're talking about all three of these women are in fact very, very influential women, right? Megan Thee Stallion, Naomi Osaka. Naomi Osaka recently said that she wasn't going to do the press interviews because of mental health. And Megan Thee Stallion, she's really smart. She's a rapper. She's a musician as well. And Leyna Bloom is obviously, the first transgender cover model, and she's also she's also had a huge impact in terms of the trans movement and in terms of making it much more in terms of making the society right now much more inclusive and representative of trans people. Okay, so last month, Bloom actually told Variety that before coming out 7 years ago, she was terrified people would discover she was transgender. Okay, and she basically hid her identity because she believed that the world wasn't ready and that someone might attack her. And this is not just what she feels, right? A lot of trans people actually go through these same feelings. They're terrified that if they come out, people are going to attack them, that, their parents are going to disown them, that they're not going to get any love and support. And that is, in fact, a very real fear that a lot of transgender people have. And the truth is, the reason they have that fear is also very understandable because in all the other past instances of when, their transgender predecessors did come out and they did come out to the world, to their parents, and they tried to get society to accept them and whatnot, they had to face a lot of discrimination. They got attacked a lot, they got harassed a lot, they got abused a lot, right? So her fears were in fact very, very real and very, very understandable for someone who is a part of the trans community, right? Because she said they see how you move and they see your magic and they want to hurt you, right? Which is the truth, right? You just want to help them because of how beautiful they are, or how they have this different sort of magic in them, and they're absolutely beautiful, and all you can think of is hurting them because you have some form of internalized transphobia towards trans people, right? But in 2014, Bloom actually announced herself to the world by modeling for a magazine shoot that featured her and another trans woman. So in 2014 is when she came out to the rest of the world because she was doing this issue, or she was, doing a magazine shoot with another trans woman. And or rather, it featured a lot of other trans women. And since then, she's become one of the first openly trans women to actually walk the runway at Paris Fashion Week. And Sports Illustrated said this on their website. Okay, Lena is legendary in the world of activism. She's strikingly gorgeous and has an undeniable sense of self that shines through the minute she walks on set. Okay, which is, something that is very positive about her personality, right? The fact that she is, the fact that she's an activist, she has so much of energy and she's so beautiful, and she has this, amazing sense of confidence. Her sense of self shines through the minute she walks on set, just goes to show how strong and resilient she is as a trans woman, right? And her story in fact represents one grounded in resilience, and we couldn't be more thrilled to help her tell it. So in a way, they're also helping her share her story with all the other women out there, women who are struggling to come to terms with who they really are. And in a sense, her story is a story of empowerment, it's a story of resilience, it's a story of, perseverance as well. So that's definitely something, that is amazing that you can see in her. And her presence as the first trans woman of color to be in our issue is a result of her lifetime dedication to forging her own path, right? And this just goes to show how this woman has, she's worked so hard to finally get where she is, and she's gotten there. She has a lot of representation, she has paved the way for a lot of other trans women and men to be a part of modeling campaigns, to be a part of the fashion industry. Right. Now, in addition to her modeling career, Bloom is also an actress. Now, the Chicago native actually appeared in the final season of FX's Pose and also starred in Asking for It, which premiered at the 2021 Tribeca Film Festival. Okay. So, in addition to modeling, she obviously does acting, and she was in this as well. And in 2019, she actually became the first transgender woman of color to have a leading role in a movie that was featured at the Cannes Film Festival. Okay. Which is something that is absolutely amazing as well. So while we're talking about her, we also, I also want to take a look back into, some of these other transgender models we were talking about, like April Ashley, Tracy Norman, and even Caroline Cossey, right? Because what exactly happened to these models, after they lost their work, after they, completely cut themselves off from the public view because, they were outed as trans, what exactly happened? Now, Norman was in fact hired by Clairol once again at the age of 63 to be the face of a new hair color campaign. And Cossey actually found the confidence to come back into the limelight, and she appeared alongside Caitlyn Jenner and Laverne Cox in this documentary film called The Trans List. And the once ostracized Ashley has actually been featured in a major exhibition in her home city of Liverpool, and in 2012 she was appointed MBE for services to transgender equality. So all of these women, they've come so far, they've come such a long way, and they've also forged the path for a lot of other trans women out there to start their modeling careers, to fight for their dreams, to keep, fighting for their dreams, because it's important, and that you shouldn't give up because of the way people treat you, and that you shouldn't give up because of the way people, abuse you and attack you, right? And I know it's hard, and it's easy for me to actually come up here and say, look, you know what, like, they shouldn't keep fighting for their dreams, especially, when it is so hard to keep fighting for your dreams, especially if you belong to the LGBTQ community, right? But these stories are in fact stories of resilience. These are stories of perseverance and stories of power and confidence, because these women are, doing much better. They're finally living their dreams. They represent the trans community. They've made sure that the trans community is visible and inclusive in different spaces. So that's something that, that we're all very hopeful about, especially in terms of the future of the trans community, right? So that is what it is for the conversation about Leyna Bloom and the transgender modeling history. But make sure you stay tuned, because I'm going to be here in a few more minutes actually to keep talking to you about why it's never too late to follow your dreams. Okay, you should always follow your dreams, so make sure you stay tuned, because I will be back